Taxation in Spanish Philippines and taxation under Americans. So, taxes imposed by the Spanish government in the Philippines, taxes during the Spanish period was compulsory. All the Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay taxes for two reasons. So, number one, as recognized of Spain sovereignty over the colonies. Number two, to defray the expenses of pacification, the act of forcibly suppressing hospitality within the colonies, and governance thereafter. So, tributo was a general tax paid by the Filipino Spain, which amounted to 8 reals those who were required to pay the tributo. So, A. 18 to 50 years old males. B. The carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmith, tailors, and shoemakers. And last is town workers such as those in road, construction, and those who's in public nature. So next is sancturum was a tax in the amount of 3 reals. These were required for the cost of Christianization. These were required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of the churches, and the purchase of materials for religious celebrations. Donativo was the tax in the amount of half real for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims. So in the later years, however, the amount collected from the donativo was almost exclusively used for the Spanish fort in Zamboanga. So next is Kajadi Comunidad was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings. Polowai, Polowai Servicio and the system of forced labor which involved within the framework of the in Incomedia system introduced into the South American colonies by the conquistadors, conquistadores and Catholic priests to accompany them. So it was present in almost all of the Spanish colonial government around the world. Polo y Servicio is the force for labor for 40 days of men ranging from 16 to 60 years old of age who were obligated to give personal services to community projects. So one could be exempted from polo by paying the fala, corruption of the Spanish falta, meaning absence. A daily fine of 1.5 real Bandala system implemented by Spanish authorities in the Philippines, but that required native Filipino farmers to sell their goods to the government. So, tax reform of 1884 from the good reforms which Spain introduced in the 19th century was the tax reform of 1884 was provided a royal decree. On March 6, 1884, this tax reform contained two important provisions. So, number one, abolition of the hated tribute and replacement of the cedula tax. And number two, reduction of the 40-day annual forced labor or PULO to 15 days. Cedula personalis Cedulas were the first issued based on the Royal Decree on March 6, 1884. So all men and women residents of the island Spaniards, foreigners, and natives who were over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula. So the only exception were the Chinese who paid another poll tax, the remontados, the infieles, that were not subject to the local administration. And the natives colonies of the archipelago of Hulu and the island of Balabac and Palawan. So all in all, there were 16 different classes of cedulas. Originally, there were 9 classes taxes. The rates of taxes range from 1.50 to 25 pesos and 10 grantes for priests, soldiers, and privileged classes. So in 1913, the Underwood Simons Tariff Act was passed, resulting to the reduction in the revenue of the government as export taxes leveled on sugar, tobacco, hemp, and copra were lifted. Governor General Francis Burton Harrison urged that tax receipts be increased to make up for the loss of revenue. So new sources of revenue were introduced later on 1914. Income tax was introduced in 1991. Inheritance tax was created in 1932. National Lottery was established to create more revenue for the government. So 1878, two direct taxes were added. First is Urbana tax on the annual rental of urban real estate industry, and tax on salaries, dividends, and profits. Tax on salaries and dividends and profits. So next is taxation under the Americans 1898 to 1903. The Americans, followed by the Spanish system of taxation, were some modifications. Internal Revenue Law of 904 passed as reaction to the problem regarding collection and land tax. It prescribes 10 major sources of revenue. So first is license taxes of firms dealing with alcoholic beve- beverage and tobacco. Number two, excess tax on alcoholic beverage and tobacco products. And three, taxes on banks and bankers. And number four is document stamp taxes. Five, the cedula. Next, taxes on insurance and insurance companies. Taxes on forest products, mining concessions, taxes on business and manufacturing. And lastly is occupationally licenses in 1907 from provinces were authorized the fee for the cedula to support the construction and the maintenance of the roads. And that's all for this report. Taxation about Spanish, Philippines, and under Americans. My name is Centino from BPED 2A.